wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Welcome to this Valentine's Day edition of the Sunday Stoic. I am Greg Sadler, guest hosting, and this is my third time guest hosting. And for the first time, we're going to have somebody else on, my wife and partner, Andi Sciacca. You want to say hi, Andi?
Hi, everyone. This is Andi Sciacca, and I'm delighted to be here.
We're doing this guest hosting, and we thought that since it was on the 14th, and since both of us do work on Stoicism and relationships and also kind of live that out, what would you say?
We try.
Yeah, that's part of the key there, that we would do a special talk just about that for the podcast. So what did you have in mind? You know, we've done a number of workshops and discussions about this over the years. We, have kind of a shtick, you could say, that we can compress into very short presentations and expand to ultimately 4-hour workshops. What do you want to talk about today in particular?
That's a really good question. So I think that this may be the first time that we've actually had the opportunity to just kind of go with what may come to us. And so maybe just talk a little bit about how we apply Stoicism in our relationship. We can share some stories if you want. I'm fine with that. Things that work, things that didn't. But, we've now been married for, I think
almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years, yeah.
It'll be 10 years this year.
10 years this year. So we've got a treasure trove of experiences that we can call on.
Both
and
positive and negative,
That's
right?
That's right. But we made it this far. So, yeah, I'm happy to share whatever that might be interesting.
Well, let's start with one that had to do directly with our presentations, and that is Stoicon. I think it was 2018 that was in London, where you and I were going to fly there and present a workshop specifically on Stoicism, love, relationships, romance, all those sorts of things. And then things didn't turn out quite the way that we had hoped, right?
That's true. Yeah, at that time, senior dog was kind of on his last legs. Literally, he was having some troubles, and it didn't afford us the opportunity to both go together. But I think that, relationships and familial relationships and loving relationships often include four-legged family members too. So even though I wasn't there with you physically, I think it was a great opportunity for us to just really share some of what we rely on when we look at trying to make improvements in our marriage and in our daily life together. And that includes caring for and loving all of our family, including our pets. So that was a tough time, but it was really, I think, an excellent example of the types of compromises and adjustments you can make if your conversation and your relationship is strong.
Yeah, I flew out there, and it's actually kind of fortunate that we weren't there for one reason, and that was that the room that we had rented turned out to be almost like a suitcase size. Right? Yeah. And they had workmen working at it at the time who were going in and out through my room to get to the place that they were working. It was quite something.
Yeah, it would not have been that romantic London weekend.
No.
We had hoped.
If we were going to have any romance, it would have to be outside of that room.
I think that's the thing, too, is fortunately both of us are academics, and so we've got a long history behind us of turning conferences and work-related trips into mini vacations, and this certainly would not have been the case when you were in London, no.
So when I went to do the presentation, some people, because you were still on the billing, were like, well, where's Andi? And I had to break to them the news that, no, it's just going to be me. And, we'd planned out this entire, let's call it a shtick, right? Our back and forth kind of interaction with some role modeling exercises and talking through examples of how to deal with difficult circumstances or, how to address things. And you weren't there. So I had to do what we do and add in some other material, and people did ask about you, and you were missed.
Well, that's good to hear. I think the only thing you could have done is perhaps picked a proxy wife from the crowd to enact some workshop. Yeah, but that would not have been good. But I think, we've given, as you had said earlier, variations on these types of workshops for a very long time. And I think the thing that I really enjoy the most, and this may be something that other people who work with their partners or spouses can relate to, is just that we get to do this as part of our life, but also as part of our work and part of our practice. And I find that, that idea of being vulnerable and sharing your stories, while it can be a little bit frightening at first, the first time you do it actually becomes part of what I really enjoy, because it's so great to be able to connect to other people through the shared experience of just simply being with another person in ways that make you try to be better yourself, I think.
So that's an interesting point where we can talk directly about Stoicism itself, this fear of revealing too much. And I know what that's like as well, although you think I'm a bit more of an oversharer that in terms of engaging with other people, because what we're doing in these workshops is partly putting on a presentation, but partly also like, it's not quite the same thing as coaching, but it's getting into that. We're bringing Stoic principles and practices and ideas for them to consider and incorporate into their life. And I think you're right. It really does make a big difference when you can say, okay, so here's something for you, but it's also something that has been for me, and let me tell you a story about that. I know, for example, in talking about Stoicism and anger management, that being willing to tell other people, I got into this because I was struggling with anger, that really makes an impact. So let me ask you this. How have you used ideas from Stoicism, not just in talking about Stoicism, but you do lots and lots and lots of interactions and presentations, and you reveal quite a lot of yourself. I know that you're more of a introverted person than I am. And so when I'm sitting here and listening to what you're talking about with other people, I'm often struck how open you are with them. Do you use any Stoic ideas or techniques to get you through that, to help you navigate, what you should reveal, what you shouldn't reveal, what, how far you're willing to go with people? I guess it's sort of like asking about not just Stoic fortitude, but Stoic prudence.
Yeah, these are all really great questions, so I'll try and kind of tackle them one at a time. I think the first thing is that I was surprised to find out that I was an introvert when I actually started doing more public work. I'd always thought of myself as very extroverted because I really love engaging with people. I, teach. I've taught for many years. I love speaking. I've always said I'm really comfortable in, like a stadium of 10,000, and it's at these small, intimate dinner parties where I sometimes find myself a little bit more trepidatious about sharing. But I think Stoicism actually helped me with that, just the being comfortable in terms of accessing that vulnerability and sharing some of my personal stories. And the biggest takeaway was just that I reminded myself through practice and reading and working with you and doing things like, the Stoic mindfulness and resilience training, I cannot be responsible for other people's opinions or feelings or, observations. And so if I release myself of that burden and that pressure and just really kind of come into the moment doing the best that I can in the moment. Again, if you've heard me talk about Stoicism once, you know that the Epictetus passage about playing one's part, or also being at a dinner party and not trying to grab at things as they pass you by, but just really being present in the moment, has helped me tremendously. I think also the first time that we did a partnered workshop and we were talking about this, it was a smaller workshop, but I was watching out into the audience and we were sitting side by side as we so often do. And I saw a partner sort of, elbow their other partner, and they were giggling and laughing as we were sharing stories. And, the other piece of it is it felt really good to be in a room full of people and say, I've recognized that I am a very controlling human being, and that has impacted my relationships. And through the practice of really kind of looking at, what I can take from Stoicism, I've been able to release a lot of that control. Maybe not all of it. I think you could probably agree.
Neither one of us has
good ways
entirely mastered that.
Yeah, but it's become easier, and it's become much more rewarding to really create that distance between myself and what I can control and how I can respond, and the external world and all of the various things that are sort of coming at you every day. Most of them demand a reply, but not all of them really require one. And I think learning to discern the difference between those two things has been incredibly rewarding for me personally, but also professionally. It's allowed me to deal with stress in a very different way. And it's also allowed me to embrace joy in a very different way, and to really kind of wonder, if I am really living in accordance with nature, what does that look like for me personally? How can I be, a contributing member of whatever group I'm in without kind of consuming the group or having that group consume me? There's so many areas which I've just benefited from really taking that moment to reflect on what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and how it fits with what I really desire for myself.
So the dichotomy of control that often gets talked about, and sometimes it gets framed as a trichotomy, like with William Irvine, where there's the things that we can influence but we don't have complete control over, which is not a bad way to look at it. I think we could talk about, steering back to the original topic, Stoicism, relationships. It's Valentine's Day, so we should probably talk about romantic relationships a bit. There's two thoughts that I had. One is that we often frame Stoicism, and especially the dichotomy of control, as if it has to do just with us as individuals. And when you're in a relationship like ours, which is, we've done a lot of growing, there's been a lot of contentiousness, there's been a lot of figuring things out along the way, and we've faced a lot of challenges sort of back to back against the world as well. I kind of think that the dichotomy of control, it could be looked at as okay, I can't control what you think about things, and I don't need to control what you think about things. And then we also can't control what other people think about things. But there's a we involved when you have a deep relationship.
Yeah.
And we can talk about, our individual little circles inside and outside, but the relationship itself and you and I being within that framework, there's some things that maybe I can't myself effectively exercise control over, but you can, and you're there to help me with that, and vice versa, And I think this isn't a insight that's unique to Stoicism. We've talked about many other people. St. Anselm talks about husband and wife who ought to be supporting each other in these different ways. Now, he thought that wives needed to be able to calm down and he's thinking about aristocratic medievals, their husband's proneness to get angry and take it out on their vassals or something like that. I think Anselm didn't have enough experience of women getting angry to see that could work both ways.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of cases where, this is not something that applies to everybody, obviously. You and I have had to work and fight for getting to this point, but that is something that is available. And, Musonius Rufus talks about this in his lectures. A lot of people get distracted because they see him saying that sexuality is basically to produce children and stuff like that, and they don't read further on in the lecture where he talks about a marriage is supposed to be a friendship. And, in our time, it could be a marriage, it could be a long-term monogamous relationship, committed, but there's that sort of growing into each other. And I think that may be one of the dangers of a misinterpretation of Stoicism would be I've got my side, you got yours, and then we only come together almost as we're doing right now, sitting across the table, you on your side, me on mine, rather than being turned out towards the world together and supporting each other.
Yeah, I think that one of the tendencies, too, and I'll say a young relationship, meaning a relationship that's in its early stages, is being somewhat uncertain about how best to build it into the kind of relationship that will last and endure. And, in our case, you have two people coming together who have very strong personalities, very strong opinions, right?
Yeah.
We both chose careers in academia.
Yeah, there are sometimes cases of the proverbial irresistible force and the immovable object with us, right?
Yeah, very much so. But I think the best piece of that is that we were very sure of who we are before we came together. And we had suffered and lost and loved and had joy in our lives prior to coming together. So we were fully formed people, but, very rough around the edges. And so our coming together was like the polishing of a stone over the years. Initially, it was all bright diamonds and everything was beautiful. And here we had found each other at the age we found each other. The irony, of course, being that we first met in the 80s in a hallway in a high school and had come together all of these years later and found this extraordinary possibility. Both of us desired the same things, we still do, but so much of what we had to deal with was circumstantial, was connected to things that were totally outside of our control. And then we put ourselves in situations where we really tested that. Both of us living with 2 dogs, 2 cats, and 7,000 books and 300 square feet above a garage. We have really had, I think, some external challenges, some familial challenges with, health of loved ones and really wanting to support people who were struggling. We've lived in different states together. We're now, here home where we both grew up in Wisconsin, and happy to be here and worked very hard to get here. But every step of our journey really tested us in a new and interesting way. And I think that when we both started really looking at I think it was that first SMRT workshop that we did, I started to understand a little bit better what it was that I didn't know and how I had thought for a very long time that I was actually doing many of the things that you're called upon to do if you're really being thoughtful.
We should say for the listeners what SMRT actually stands for because they might not be familiar with it.
Sure. I think I said it earlier, but very fast. So Stoic Mindfulness and Resilience Training, which is a free workshop that runs annually. And for my part, the first time I did it, it was like light bulbs going off because I had been someone who, was in cognitive therapy from a very young age. I mean, there were all kinds of practices that I did that were designed to try and help you better understand yourself and, deal with this trauma or that trauma or, learn how to be better at this. I did academic coaching and, business and professional coaching. I was a coach. And yet it was when I first started to really do the exercises, thinking about what I wanted my day to look like, thinking about how my day had gone, thinking of what had occurred, what was different than what I expected. How could I anticipate these differences and create better ways of dealing with them? For some reason, it just really hit right with me. And I think, you often say you're not a Stoic, you're an eclectic, and I'm not a Stoic, but I really take incredible value in studying it and really trying to remind myself that it's a great way of addressing some of these other things that I'd been struggling with for years. Those things certainly impacted our friendship, our relationship, our marriage, and I find it to be a very useful tool, especially when I'm feeling like I need to kind of reframe something that feels
unfair
definitely unfair, or like it's just a rut. Like if I'm stuck in a rut, I have to take a step back and ask myself, what is that about, and what are the expectations that I'm placing on whatever it is, and why aren't I looking at sort of my inner dialogue and how I might change that to have it be something that fits better for what's happening at that time.
So you talked about young relationships, and I think that's what a lot of people would probably have in mind when they, hear somebody saying, well, we're going to talk about Stoicism and romantic or erotic relationships.
Sure.
It's Valentine's Day. So we should probably shift gears to talking about that. And I think that, obviously we've been off the market, so to speak, for a long time, right?
Yeah.
But I think Stoicism has a lot to say about that. Very often people are surprised when they hear that, but when you look at Stoic literature, they actually do say that the sage will be erotikos. That means that the sage will be a lover, and they say that eros or romantic or erotic love is something that a Stoic will feel. It's just that they're not going to feel it and follow it in precisely the same ways as other people that are likely to lead them into predicaments and troubles. And I was thinking, we were talking about both of us being essentially in early middle age when we finally managed to connect up with each other and start having this
epistolary romance.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about that some other time. I think it's quite a story for a lot of people. It reminds me of something that Rilke says in Letters to a Young Poet, where he talks about younger people who haven't really fully developed themselves. They haven't cultivated what he calls solitude within themselves. But, we could look at it in a Stoic way and say they haven't figured out who they are, what it is that they want. They're not making the kind of progress that they need. And they think that by throwing themselves into a relationship that this is going to solve their problems. This is going to fix things. And Epictetus talks about this quite a bit. If you let your eyes be turned by some pretty maid or boy, you essentially become enslaved to that. And there's this ascetic side to Stoicism, I think, when it comes to matters of sexuality and all the modalities from that to friendship. But there's also this recognition that, we are attracted to other people, and we need to be mindful and thoughtful about what it is that we're looking to get from them. We all have sexual desires and urges, some more, some less, right? And that's often, you could say, at least pursued, if not necessarily satisfied, within the dimension of dating and romance and all these sorts of things. A lot of people are kind of a work in progress, figuring out who they are and what they actually want and what they don't want.
Sure.
Things that they thought they wanted, and turns out that they don't want that sort of thing. It's sort of like a moving target because the other person is typically doing that as well. So maybe we could, give some decent, not necessarily one size fits all, but useful Stoic advice for the many people out there, I think, who would like to be in a relationship but aren't able to find the person,
Sure.
or their relationship is, they're in a relationship and it's not satisfactory, or they're in between, especially right now with COVID, where if you're dating and you're actually, smart and safe, it's probably over Zoom.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, so much has changed just as the result of the pandemic, and definitely in terms of how people relate. But some of the issues that you're identifying, I think, have been, the plague of relationships since the beginning of time. How do you connect? How do you relate? How do you, seek your own satisfaction? And I think contribute to the satisfaction of another. And one of the things that you were just talking about is this idea of what you want, what you don't want, what the other person wants. I think, to my mind, one of the real sort of early cues that I certainly did have this potential to be in a long-term relationship with you was the fact that what we wanted and what we didn't want from one another or for ourselves was aligned enough that we could work with that as a solid foundation. But there are also things that I was finding myself very open to with you that I wouldn't have been with someone else, because I had, that trust in what we were trying to build together. And so I think that whether it's your physical relationship or your emotional or intellectual or spiritual relationship that you have with another person, if you're entering into that space of trying to define, whether or not this might be a good fit for you or this might be the right time for you, I think taking a step back and asking yourself what the things that you desire and what the things that you resist look like, and where that sort of connects with the other person.
Do you think it matters to figure out why you desire what you desire? It's not just enough to figure out what it is that you are desiring, or to, use the opposite, are averse to.
Sure, definitely. I think a lot of people that I've talked to who are in unhappy relationships have sort of a common thread, and that is that they thought that the person would change, or they thought that coming together would somehow make something different, or they thought that having children would bring,
or getting married,
a different type of love, right? Or whatever. And I think that that's a very dangerous trap, because yes, we change as a result of being with another, but the change is maybe in habit or in practice or a deepening. You're not going to take a broken situation and make it better by adding another sort of structure on it, whether that's dating, exclusively, or engaging in a sexual relationship, or being married, or leaving a job and moving across country for the other person. Like, you have to know that the trust is there and that the fit is right, and then you can make those types of modifications.
So let me ask you then, we'll create an imaginary Stoic, and in order to avoid any sort of gender stuff, we'll just call them Pat, right?
Sure.
Pat isn't in a relationship. Pat would like to be in a relationship, that includes all these different things of like friendship all the way to sexual satisfaction, and somebody who will put in a whole bunch of other stable finances,
sure,
and has an interesting set of connections that they'll open them up to and widen their world, and they can also share with. So should Pat be choosy in dating? Should Pat be willing to simply, if they're not getting what they want in a relationship, walk away, right?
Sure. That's a great question. So in order to kind of maintain this, gender neutral position, let's say that Pat is dating Jean. Okay.
Nice.
And, Pat and Jean have maybe some sparks initially. There's some things that seem to be working. I think it really depends on what Pat and Jean want. Are they looking for something right now that gives them maybe physical pleasure or companionship or the opportunity to, just see the world with another like-minded person? If so, and it's not hitting every single button, it's perfectly fine for Pat and Jean to date and to get to know one another and to get to, experience life together. I think where it becomes complicated is if Pat and Jean are not expressing what they really ultimately are hoping is the outcome of this relationship, or what they really want.
Yeah. If they start using love too quickly and easily, right?
Well, that's
or
that's
want
a
to
red
be
flag.
with you forever, or
Sure,
things like that.
Sure, that, but also perhaps misrepresenting their feelings on certain very fundamental, important matters, whether that is financial responsibility or desire to have children or viewpoints. You can have very different political or social viewpoints from a partner and still engage in a very respectful, meaningful dialogue. If you find yourself not being the person you are, or in some way modifying that for the sake of another in ways that actually deny whatever it is about you that is most important, then that's a danger zone. And I think that, we've all seen people do that. And sometimes it's quick and it's a painful breakup after a short time of dating. And sometimes it's a 50-year marriage. And one day they wake up and say, why am I here?
Yeah, to do a little storytelling. When we first got together as a romantic couple, right, as opposed to just people who knew each other and occasionally flirted with each other, because we also crossed paths in the 90s, right? Just blocks from here, working in the same office
That's
building.
true.
But we did it through Facebook, right? I
Yes.
connected with you, and then we started chatting back and forth. And one of the things that I noticed, because I'd gotten on Facebook fairly recently, was just how many of the people that we went to school with were either already divorced or in the process of getting a divorce, or within about months or a year of connecting on Facebook, suddenly they're in that. And it seemed like, and I was very surprised because I thought a lot of these people seemed very, I don't know, they'd figured out what they wanted.
Sure.
But there was something about that time. So we're talking about 2010, 2011. There was something about that time for people of our age where I think a lot of people were reassessing what was going on in their relationships. And it could have been that the other partner was reassessing and said, I'm serving you.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, to show our age, I graduated from high school in 89, you in 88. Neither of us went straight to college. We both did other things. I had a lot of friends who dated, went to high school, dated in college, got married, got jobs, had kids. I think what I was struck by even more than the sort of demise of their relationships was how public it was. So Facebook itself gave this platform and people were exposing all of these issues. And I'm still struck when, you talk about you being more of an overshare and me being private. I'm always struck when people are putting, so much of their personal information onto social media. But that was really what was a key indicator to me that perhaps by waiting, because I had never married before we married, by waiting to marry, by being, in my own share of really trying relationships, some that were very rewarding, I had done, the kind of research, I guess, maybe experiential learning, if you will, that led me to know what it was that I was willing to say yes to for a lifetime. And I didn't want to make a decision that was like, oh, I guess I was wrong. I guess this isn't my forever person.
Yeah.
And so I have zero regrets about anything that happened, and I'm glad that I waited, and I'm glad that it ended up being you that I married, but that still didn't make it easier. Well, thanks. We still, like you said at the top, I mean, we've worked at this and we continue to work at it, and that's part of what's required, I think. Yeah.
That's completely right. And I'll sort of level with you. We are both thumatic people in that we're ready to argue and scrap, and we both want to be right. And so Stoicism has been very, very helpful for both of us, sometimes on the same level. Sometimes there were things that I needed from it in order to improve our relationship.
Sure.
On my side, sometimes there were things that you needed. And so I think it can be quite useful for people like that. It might actually be useful for people who are less inclined to stand up for themselves, which is not either one of our problems.
No. Well, I think the other thing, too, is you're absolutely right. We're both willing to sort of, go to the mat for what we believe in. But I think we've also really learned over time
we've
that
learned
not everything is worth going to the mat over.
Exactly,
Like there's certain things that are fundamental issues that you do need to sort of tease out and work your way through. But I mean, it's been a huge help for me to just go, okay, and kind of let things go when I needed to.
Yeah, and some of them fit into going back to that, circling around to the dichotomy of control, right? Being right and being acknowledged as being right is less important than, say, having a harmonious relationship, or what else? Deciding what's going to happen at what time, or determining. Well, you could think of the things that people shouldn't get into fights into, but they can always provoke fights. What should we watch? What should we eat? Where should we go?
Sure.
What should we spend money on? All those sorts of things. Yeah.
Equally dangerous are the people who are incredibly passive and never fight. That to me is as much of a red flag as compromising, your belief system for the sake of being in relationship with someone else.
So are you saying that for some people, they really ought to fight more?
Not that they ought to fight more, but they ought to be able to express dissent or disagreement. And I think that there are some people, and maybe it's ending with our generation, because I don't see the generations behind us experiencing this quite as much. But this idea that sort of like a passivity or just whatever you say, or some of the kind of just apathetic responses to what really should be a conflict indicate to me a lack of caring and engagement. Like, it's one thing to
I think sometimes it's often due to fear.
Yeah,
fear of
sure.
like offending the other person or losing them, and
or not caring, quite honestly.
Yeah.
You know, I have a friend, and obviously won't name that person. we'll call them Pat.
Okay.
So this is another Pat, and Pat is married, of course, to Jean. And I think it's just this idea that they've given up. And so even on things that I know Pat has an opinion about, Jean would not have any idea, because Pat is just simply like, whatever. Like, this is the lot I've chosen in life, and this is my marriage, and this is what it looks like. And to me, that's a very sad place. It's as sad as sort of the Pat and Jean wandering the wilderness trying to like sort out whether or not investing in another person is worth the time or the effort, or potentially being hurt by taking a risk and overcoming that fear, and then discovering that, you know, that was not the right fit for you. But yeah, I mean, it does take work. And this is sort of, I think, the last myth that, you know, kind of comes down from just years of observation and talking to others, is this idea that, you know, they say that a good relationship takes work. So you find the relationship that's going to take the most work, and, you know, it'll turn out to be the
sounds like
best.
a terrible idea.
It is a terrible idea, but I can't tell you how many people have, you know, sort of shared with me that they thought, you know, well, it was so exciting and it was so
that's
energetic, and you find out that that's not sustainable.
So this is a really great way to get back to, again, thinking about Stoicism. A lot of, again, Stoicism, romantic relationships, a lot of people would be like, yeah, I like Stoicism for like making sure I get to the gym or getting my finances in order, or not getting, you know, ticked off by my boss or my customers. But in romantic life, you know, I want that spark to be there, and I don't want to tamp anything down, because the Stoics would be, you know, a little bit too prudish or stick in the mud. They want us to be all, you know, nice and calm, and that isn't what I want out of romantic life. Now, so I think that we're a good example of people who, you know, when we have time for a romantic life, because we're both also kind of workaholics, Stoicism hasn't gotten in the way of passion.
No.
That's what people are really talking about, right? Passion and excitement. So now, would you get that out of reading the Stoic text, though? Or would you get the impression that, I mean, you think about Marcus Aurelius talking about sexuality and saying it's just a rubbing of abdomens on abdomens with some spasms and stuff like that. Right? Yeah. So that's definitely not the way you'd want to go in thinking about Stoicism and romance.
No.
Could Stoicism actually contribute to being romantic?
Of course.
Romantic, not just in the sort of sappy sense.
Sure.
But erotic.
Absolutely. I mean, I was thinking of Marcus, but not the quote you mentioned, the one where he's talking about, you know, do everything with love, real love, like when you find your people. And I just think that that's a huge statement, because to be truly loving is to be erotic. It is to be joyful. It is to be compassionate and grateful and kind and willing to be vulnerable. And I think that Stoicism provides a framework for how to keep ourselves perhaps from going down the wrong path, but it doesn't in any way prohibit us from having fun or being spontaneous or having a complex and multi-layered, rich and engaging sex life. You know, there's so many different things that a really good relationship will allow you to explore and to do and to really build into your being. And that's a true freedom. And if your nature and the way that you approach your marriage or your relationship or your partnership or whatever it may be is something that's based on creating that trust and harmony, I don't think that that's anything that we would reduce to abdomens. I mean, that can certainly be a part of it, but you know, it's really, that's not the main reason that people come together and bring bodies together as well as minds and hearts and souls. It's to create something that has a richness to it. And when you're not distracted by all of the other nonsense, right? If you're not distracted by what this person thinks of this other thing over here, you have all that energy. Exactly. You can put it into the things that really are good for you and good for your partner too.
Well, that's a really good point, I think, to end on. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to?
No, I mean, we could do this for days, as we both know. So this has been fun. We're both talkers. But yeah, I think it's great to be able to celebrate Valentine's Day with this sort of eye toward, one possible thing that someone might use to enrich their lives and really, bring themselves more happiness and peace.
Well, that sounds great. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody from the Sunday Stoic. Thanks for having us on again.
Yep.
I'm glad to be joined by Andi this time.
It's been fun.